Elizabeth Fairchild's hands were shaking when she crossed that ballroom floor. Every eye in Philadelphia watched her walk toward the one man no one dared approach, and she knew with every step that she might not come back from this. She didn't know his name then. She only knew the dare and the silence pressing in around her like a wall. If you're new here, subscribe and follow Elizabeth's story all the way to the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1812 arrived in Philadelphia with the kind of heat that made silk dresses cling and tempers run short. The Hargrove Gala was the first true event of the social season, held in the grand federal-style mansion on Chestnut Street, where crystal chandeliers threw warm light across polished floors, and the air smelled of beeswax candles and expensive perfume. For most of the women in that room, it was another evening of strategic smiling and careful conversation. For Elizabeth Fairchild, it was her first. She stood near the edge of the room, one gloved hand resting lightly on the back of a gilded chair, and told herself she was not afraid. She was afraid. "Don't grip that chair like you're holding on for dear life," Aunt Constance murmured beside her without turning her head. Constance Fairchild was a small woman with iron-gray hair and a spine that never bent, not even slightly. She had chaperoned Elizabeth down from Lancaster with the same composed efficiency with which she managed everything else, precisely without complaint and with very little warmth. "Breathe, child. You look like you're about to attend a hanging." "I might be," Elizabeth said quietly. Constance made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "Stand straight. Smile. Speak only when spoken to, and when you do speak, say less than you think you should. That is the whole of Philadelphia society." Elizabeth straightened. She smiled. She watched. The room was full of women in high-waisted muslin gowns and men in dark coats with brass buttons that caught the light when they turned. Conversations wove around her in fragments, talk of politics, of cotton prices, of who had married whom, and why it was or wasn't a sound arrangement. She caught names she recognized from Constance's careful briefings on the carriage ride down the Hargroves, their hosts, the Wentworths, the Caldwells. Names that meant money, property, influence. Names that meant nothing to a girl from Lancaster, whose family's greatest social achievement had been a letter of introduction from the county magistrate. She was wondering whether she had made a terrible mistake in coming at all when she heard the whisper. It started near the windows, a cluster of young women in pale gowns who had been watching the entrance with sharp, waiting eyes. Elizabeth didn't catch the words at first, only the tone, a collective intake of breath, a flutter of fans, the kind of sudden charged attention that meant something had changed in the room. She turned to look. He had come in quietly, which seemed impossible given the effect his arrival produced. He stood just inside the doorway, and the space around him was empty. Not because the room was sparse, but because people had shifted almost without realizing it away from him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that had no ornamentation and needed none. His face was angular and unsmiling, and he surveyed the room with the particular calm of a man who has long since stopped expecting it to offer him anything interesting. "Nathaniel Ashcroft," Constance said, and her voice had dropped half a register. "You know him. Everyone knows him. Knowing him and speaking to him are entirely different matters." Constance adjusted her glove with precise, deliberate movements. "His family owns half the Delaware Valley. His father was in Congress. He himself has declined every political appointment offered him, which the city cannot decide whether to admire or resent. He attends 3 events per year, never dances, never courts, and has not smiled publicly in recent memory." Elizabeth watched him accept a glass from a passing servant without looking at the servant, his gaze still moving slowly across the room. "Why does everyone look so frightened of him?" "Because he is indifferent to them," Constance said simply. "There is nothing more unsettling to society than a man who doesn't need its approval." Across the room, the cluster of young women were no longer whispering. One of them, tall, dark-haired, wearing a gown, the exact deep blue of a late evening sky, turned and looked directly at Elizabeth. Her name, Elizabeth would learn, was Cecilia Whitmore. At that moment, she only knew the look, appraising, calculating, with a small smile at the corner of her mouth that didn't reach her eyes. "Is that the Lancaster girl?" Cecilia said. She didn't lower her voice. The women around her turned. Elizabeth felt the attention like a hand pressed flat against her chest. Fairchild, someone confirmed. Provincial family. No particular connections. How charming, Cecilia said in a tone that meant the opposite. She tilted her head slightly, studying Elizabeth with the mild curiosity one might give an unusual insect. Tell me. And now she raised her voice just enough a performance calibrated for an audience. Are you enjoying your first Philadelphia ball, Miss Fairchild? Elizabeth met her gaze. Very much, Miss. Whitmore. Cecilia Whitmore. She said it the way one states a known fact, certain of its weight. We were just remarking that you seem rather unattached this evening. No escort, I see. My aunt is with me. Of course. Cecilia glanced at Constance with polite dismissal, then back to Elizabeth. We were also just wondering. Another glance at her companions, a shared smile. Whether a girl with real courage might do what none of us have managed. Go speak to Mr. Ashcroft. The room, or this small corner of it, seemed to sharpen. Elizabeth was aware of the women watching her, of Constance going very still at her side of the distance between herself and the tall, motionless man across the floor. He doesn't bite, Cecilia continued pleasantly. Presumably, though no one's been close enough lately to confirm it. Light laughter from the group, easy practice designed to diminish. Elizabeth was aware of the shape of what was happening. This was a test, a trap dressed as a dare. If she walked away, she would be timid provincial, exactly what Cecilia already believed her to be. If she went well, no one could entirely predict what happened if she went. He doesn't look frightening to me, Elizabeth said. It came out steadier than she felt. She didn't plan it. But once it was said, it was irrevocable, and she found strangely that she didn't regret it. Cecilia's smile sharpened. Then by all means. Constance said nothing. Elizabeth understood from years of reading her aunt's silences that this particular silence meant, you've made your choice, now make it worth making. She crossed the floor. She was aware of the distance in a way she had never been aware of any distance before. Every step felt deliberate, measured, exposed. The music from the quartet in the far corner continued bright and unhearing. A few heads turned. She kept her chin level and her pace even, and told herself that it was simply walking, which she had done 10,000 times before without incident. He saw her coming. She knew because his gaze, which had been moving slowly across the far wall, stopped. Settled on her. Did not move away. Most men she had observed looked at a woman approaching, and then quickly looked elsewhere, as though to spare both parties the awkwardness of direct acknowledgement. Nathaniel Ashcroft looked at her the way a man looks at something he's trying to accurately understand, with patience and without embarrassment. She stopped 2 feet from him. Perfectly respectable distance. Mr. Ashcroft, she said, I'm Elizabeth Fairchild. I've just arrived in Philadelphia, and I don't know very many people here. I was wondering if you might do me the kindness of a single dance. He said nothing for a moment. The silence was not unkind. It had no particular quality of cruelty, but it was long enough that she had time to feel the full weight of every eye she suspected was on her back. You were dared? He said. His voice was quieter than she expected. Even. She blinked. I beg your pardon, Miss Whitmore. He didn't glance toward Cecilia. He didn't need to. She has made a version of this arrangement twice before with 2 other young women, both of whom declined before reaching me. You did not decline. Elizabeth considered lying. She considered deflecting. She looked at him directly and decided that a man who had already identified the mechanics of the situation deserved an honest answer. I was dared, she said. But I came because I wanted to. Something moved across his face. Not a smile, not quite. A shift brief and controlled like the surface of water touched by wind. Why? He asked. Because everyone stepped back, she said. And I've never found that a sufficient reason to do the same. Another silence. Shorter this time. He held out his hand. The dance was a simple country reel, not the kind of elaborate display the room might have hoped for, but genuine and unhurried. He danced with the quiet competence of a man who had learned well and saw no need to perform it. He didn't speak for the first several measures, and Elizabeth did not fill the silence. She had learned early that silence was not always a vacancy waiting to be crowded. "You play," he said when they came together at the figure's turn. She looked at him. "I'm sorry. Your hands." He didn't elaborate beyond a slight indication of her right hand, the one he held. "The callus pattern on your fingertips. You play an instrument. Piano, I'd reckon." She glanced down reflexively. "Since I was 6 years old." Well enough that it's the only thing I've been told with any consistency that I do well." He considered that. "That's an unusual thing to say about oneself at a ball." "I'm an unusual person to be at this particular ball," she said. "I thought honesty might serve better than pretense, given that you'd already identified the dare." They separated for a measure, moved through the pattern, came together again. Around them, other couples completed the figures, and Elizabeth was aware that the attention she'd brought to this corner of the floor had not entirely dispersed. Cecilia Whitmore, somewhere behind her left shoulder, had gone very quiet. "Lancaster," he said. It wasn't a question. "My father is a physician there. My mother—" She paused. "My mother passed 3 winters ago. My aunt brought me down for the season at my father's request. He believes it will be good for me." "And do you agree with him?" She considered the question with the honesty it seemed to deserve. "I think I might, though I didn't expect to be dared across a ballroom floor within my first half hour." This time something in his expression did shift fractionally, unmistakably. Not amusement precisely. Recognition, perhaps. "Miss Whitmore is consistent in her unkindnesses," he said. "She has placed 3 young women in that position this season. The first 2 turned back. She considers it a test of social character." "And what does passing the test prove? To her? Likely nothing flattering." He turned them smoothly at the figure's end. "To me it has proven at minimum that you have better nerves than most of Philadelphia's eligible daughters." "Or worse judgment," Elizabeth said. He looked at her, then really looked in a way that was different from the careful, measuring attention of before. It was brief, but she felt it. "That," he said, "remains to be seen." The music ended. He released her hand with the precise formality of a man who observes every propriety, bowed slightly, and stepped back. The room, which had been holding something that wasn't quite breath, seemed to exhale. Cecilia Whitmore appeared at Elizabeth's side within 30 seconds, which was in itself a kind of acknowledgement. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were doing something complicated. "Well," she said, "I didn't expect you to actually go through with it." "I know," Elizabeth said pleasantly. Cecilia's gaze moved past her to where Nathaniel had returned to his position near the wall. "He danced with you," she said, as though the fact still required processing. "He did. He hasn't danced with anyone in 2 seasons." "I didn't know that at the time," Elizabeth said. "I simply asked." Cecilia turned back to her. The composure was still in place, but something behind it had shifted, reassessing, recalibrating. "You're not what I expected," she said, and it was not quite a compliment and not quite an insult. It occupied its own careful middle ground. "I reckon that's often the case with people," Elizabeth said, "when you've decided what to expect before you've met them." She excused herself and returned to Constance, who was standing exactly where she had left her, expression unchanged. "Well," Constance said. "Well," Elizabeth agreed. "He danced with you." "Yes?" "He has not danced with anyone since his mother's funeral 2 years past." Constance took a measured sip from the glass in her hand. "I've no idea what you said to him. I was honest with him." Constance was quiet for a moment. "In this room," she said finally, "that is either a very wise choice or a very dangerous one." "I know," Elizabeth said. She looked across the floor to where Nathaniel Ashcroft stood alone in a room full of people watching nothing in particular. As though he felt the attention, he turned his head. For the span of a breath, his gaze found hers across the crowded room. He looked away first, but it was slow, And it was deliberate, and Elizabeth understood, or thought she understood, that it was not dismissal. She filed the evening's evidence carefully in her mind, the dare, the dance, the silence between them that had felt improbably like a conversation. Then she turned to her aunt and said, "Will you introduce me to the Hargroves? I'd like to begin this season properly." Constance's expression for the first time all evening came close to warm. "Yes," she said, "I think I will." In the days that followed, Philadelphia did not forget what it had seen. The city's social memory was long and particular, and the image of Elizabeth Fairchild crossing the Hargrove ballroom floor to stand before Nathaniel Ashcroft, and the fact that he had taken her hand, circulated through drawing rooms and morning calls with the reliable energy of a well-placed rumor. Most of it was curiosity, the unmalicious kind. Some of it was not. The Fairchild household modest rooms on Spruce Street that Constance had arranged with characteristic efficiency received its first caller the morning after the gala. 2 callers, in fact. Mrs. Hargrove herself, who came with genuine warmth and an invitation to a musical afternoon the following Thursday, and a young woman named Margaret Voss, who came with bright eyes and the frank social honesty of a person who had decided Elizabeth was interesting and intended to investigate. "You must tell me everything," Margaret said, settling into the parlor chair, as though she had sat in it 100 times. She was small, fair-haired, with an animated face that could not successfully conceal what she was thinking. "Every word. Start from when you first crossed the floor." "I simply asked him to dance," Elizabeth said. Margaret stared at her. "You simply—" She pressed her lips together. "Miss Fairchild, Elizabeth. In 2 seasons, 4 women have attempted to approach Mr. Ashcroft at social events. 2 of them were the daughters of men he does business with. All 4 were turned away, not rudely but definitively. He danced with you." "I was honest with him," Elizabeth said for the second time. Margaret considered this. "What does that mean?" "I told him I'd been dared and that I'd come anyway." Margaret blinked. "And that worked?" "I don't know that it worked," Elizabeth said carefully. "I only know that it was true, and that I offered it to him plainly, and that he seemed to find it—" She paused, searching for the right word, worth responding to. Margaret sat back in her chair with an expression that suggested she was revising several assumptions simultaneously. "You are very strange," she said. "I mean that as a compliment. Most girls from out of town spend their first 3 weeks here learning to say nothing correctly. You said something true and got Nathaniel Ashcroft to dance with you." "It might have gone very differently," Elizabeth said. "It might have," Margaret agreed. "But it didn't." She was invited to the musical afternoon at Hargrove House, and she played. Constance had arranged it carefully. Elizabeth would perform 2 pieces modestly as one of several performers. She prepared for 3 days, chosen her repertoire with the calculated precision of someone who understood that this was not merely a performance, but an audition, though the word would never be used. She played a Haydn sonata and a Scottish air that her mother had loved. The room, which had been buzzing with the soft social conversation that overlays every gathering of Philadelphia's comfortable classes, went quiet somewhere in the first measures of the Haydn. By the Scottish air, it had the quality of held breath. When she finished, the applause was genuine. Mrs. Hargrove leaned toward the woman beside her and said something Elizabeth was too far away to hear. Margaret Voss, seated near the window, caught Elizabeth's eye and made the smallest possible gesture of satisfaction. Cecilia Whitmore applauded with everyone else. Her expression was pleasant and precise, and when she spoke to Elizabeth afterward, her tone was perfectly civil. "You play beautifully," she said. "I didn't know that about you." "There are likely many things we don't yet know about each other," Elizabeth said. Cecilia smiled, the particular smile that seemed to function as her default response to anything she wasn't certain how to categorize. "No doubt," she said. "Tell me, has Mr. Ashcroft called on you since the Hargrove Gala?" "He has not." "I see." The smile held. "I ask only because there's been some talk. Nothing serious. Simply people notice the dance, and they are curious what it signifies." A dance signifies a dance, Elizabeth said evenly. Nothing more unless one makes it more. Of course, Cecilia said. Though in this city, what people make of things tends to matter rather more than what the things actually are. She moved away with the smooth ease of a woman who has long since mastered the art of departing a conversation at exactly the right moment. Elizabeth stood with the echo of those words and understood with the particular clarity of someone newly arrived in a new world that the evening at the Hargrove Gala had not ended. It had simply taken on a different form, and it would continue to do so through every morning call, every musical afternoon, every casual mention in every drawing room in this city until Philadelphia had decided what it thought of her. She straightened her spine, the way Constance had taught her. She intended to have a say in that decision. The morning after the musical afternoon at Hargrove House, Elizabeth received a note. It was brief, written on heavy cream paper in a hand that was angular and unhurried, the kind of penmanship that belonged to a man who never rushed anything. Miss Fairchild, I understand you played Haydn yesterday. I am told you played it uncommonly well. If you have no prior engagement Thursday morning, I would be grateful if you might call at Ashcroft House. My mother would like to meet you. N. Ashcroft. Elizabeth read it twice. Then she handed it to Constance without a word. Constance read it once, set it down on the breakfast table, picked up her tea. Well, she said. Well, Elizabeth said. His mother. Constance turned the cup in her hands. Eleanor Ashcroft is not a woman who meets people casually. She is confined largely to the house now. Her health has not been strong since her husband died, but her influence in this city has not diminished proportionally. If she has asked to meet you, it is because someone told her something about you that interested her. Or because her son did, Elizabeth said quietly. Constance looked at her over the rim of her cup. Said nothing. Which in Constance's language meant quite a lot. Elizabeth wrote back that Thursday morning would suit her perfectly. She arrived at Ashcroft House at 10 o'clock with Constance beside her and her nerves arranged as carefully as her dress. The house was federal-style serious and well-maintained with the quiet authority of a building that had never needed to announce itself. A butler showed them into a sitting room where Eleanor Ashcroft was already waiting. She was not what Elizabeth expected. She had anticipated severity, some version of the city's impression of the family, which ran to words like formidable and remote. What she found instead was a woman in her late 60s with sharp dark eyes and the particular stillness of someone who has learned over many decades to observe more than she speaks. She was wrapped in a shawl, despite the summer warmth. Her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at Elizabeth the way her son had looked at her across the ballroom floor, with patience and without pretense. Miss Fairchild, Eleanor said. Sit down. I don't believe in prolonging formalities when one is my age. My son tells me you crossed the Hargrove ballroom to speak to him when no one else would. Is that accurate? Elizabeth sat. Yes, ma'am. He also tells me you admitted to the dare before he asked. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor studied her for a moment. Why? Because he'd already worked it out, Elizabeth said. It seemed disrespectful to pretend otherwise. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, quick warm there and gone. I have been trying to teach my son for 30 years that honesty is not a vulnerability, she said. Philadelphia keeps teaching him the opposite. She tilted her head slightly. You play piano? Since I was a child. Play something for me. It was not quite a request. Elizabeth glanced toward the instrument in the corner, an older pianoforte well kept with the particular warmth of a thing much used and genuinely loved. She stood moved to the bench and played the Scottish air she had played at Hargrove House, the one her mother had loved. When she finished, the room was quiet. Your mother taught you that one, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Elizabeth turned on the bench. Yes, ma'am. How did you know? Because you played it differently than the Haydn. You played the Haydn for the room. You played that one for someone who isn't here anymore. Eleanor unfolded her hands and refolded them. My son was right to send the note. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway 20 minutes into the visit, which Elizabeth suspected was not accidental timing. He was in his working clothes, No coat shirt sleeves, the look of a man interrupted from something practical, and he stopped when he saw her, as though he had not quite resolved whether to enter or withdraw. "You're here," he said, not unwelcoming, simply stating a fact. "Your mother invited me," Elizabeth said. "I know." He came in then, took a chair across the room rather than the one nearest her, which Elizabeth noted, and filed away. He maintained distances with the careful deliberateness of a man who had learned that proximity was something people read meaning into. "She enjoyed your playing." She was kind enough to say so. "I don't say things to be kind," Eleanor said mildly from her chair. "I say them because they're true." The two occasionally overlap. Nathaniel looked at his mother with the expression of a man very familiar with that particular observation. Then he looked at Elizabeth. "Will you be at the Caldwell dinner next week?" "I believe my aunt has accepted the invitation, yes." He nodded once with the economy of a man who did not nod without meaning it, and said nothing further on the subject. But he stayed for the remainder of the visit. That was the first thing Elizabeth noted. He stayed. The Caldwell dinner was 20 people in a long candlelit dining room, with conversation that moved between cotton prices, the situation on the Canadian border, and the season's eligible matches, all three treated with roughly equal political gravity. Elizabeth was seated 6 places from Nathaniel, and spent the meal being carefully interviewed by the woman on her left, a Mrs. Dunmore, who asked questions with the pleasant persistence of someone conducting a survey she intended to publish. "And your father is a physician," Mrs. Dunmore said. "How lovely. And your mother, forgive me. I understand she passed some years ago." 3 winters ago, Elizabeth said. "Yes." "Such a loss." The sympathy was genuine if practiced. "And you've come down for the season. Any particular prospects in mind, or is it simply experience?" "Simply experience, ma'am." "Sensible." Mrs. Dunmore took a small sip of wine. "Though I will say, Miss Fairchild, that your particular brand of experience has been noted. The dance at Hargrove's." She smiled pleasantly. "Everyone is very curious." "So I've gathered," Elizabeth said. "I find curiosity generally preferable to indifference. Unless, of course, the curiosity becomes pointed." Mrs. Dunmore set down her glass with a delicate precision. "Miss Whitmore, for instance, has been curious in a way I might describe as rather architectural. She tends to build things from the materials she collects." Elizabeth looked at her. "What sort of things?" "Impressions," Mrs. Dunmore said simply. "Interpretations. She is very gifted at taking an action that is entirely innocent and arranging it to suggest something less so." She paused. "I mention this only because I think you are a straightforward young woman who has perhaps not yet encountered the less straightforward variety." "I appreciate the warning," Elizabeth said. "It's not a warning," Mrs. Dunmore said. "Merely a weather forecast." Across the table, 3 seats down, Cecilia Whitmore was talking to the man beside her, with animated ease, her laughter soft and well-timed, her expression bright. She did not look at Elizabeth. That was, Elizabeth was beginning to understand itself a kind of looking. After dinner, when the party had moved to the drawing room and the conversation had rearranged itself into smaller, more intimate configurations, Nathaniel crossed the room and stopped beside her with the directness of a man who did not believe in approaching things sideways. "How are you finding Philadelphia?" he asked. "Interesting," she said, "and occasionally clarifying." "In what sense?" "I'm learning a great deal about how this city operates," she said. "The social mechanics, who talks to whom and why, and what's actually meant by what's said aloud versus what's communicated by everything else." He was quiet for a moment. "You're a quick study." "My father raised me to observe carefully." She turned her cup in her hands. "He said most problems medical and otherwise announce themselves plainly if you're willing to look directly at them. Most people in this city," Nathaniel said, "are not willing to look directly at anything." "I've noticed." Something in his expression shifted fractionally. "It makes things easier, when someone will." She looked at him. He was not looking at her directly. His gaze was slightly to the side, which she had identified as his characteristic mode when saying something he was not certain he intended to say. A man who measured his words with the same precision he maintained his distances. "Mr. Ashcroft," she said carefully, "may I ask you something directly?" "You may." "Why did you dance with me?" He was quiet long enough that she began to wonder if she'd overstepped. Then he said, "Because you told me the truth when it would have been easier to tell me something else. And because—" He paused. "Because you said you came, even though you'd been dared, and that the dare wasn't the reason. I wanted to know if someone like that existed." "And," she said. He looked at her then, directly the way he had across the ballroom floor. "And apparently they do," he said. "I'm still determining what to do with that information." He excused himself shortly after with the same quiet formality he used for everything, and Elizabeth stood with those words settling into her like stones into still water, and tried to decide what she thought of a man who said exactly what he meant and seemed to expect the same in return. She thought on balance that she liked him very much, which was under the circumstances entirely inconvenient. It was Margaret Voss who brought her the first real piece of news 3 days after the Caldwell dinner, arriving at the Spruce Street rooms with pink cheeks and an expression that sat uneasily between excitement and concern. "I have to tell you something," Margaret said before she had fully removed her bonnet. "And I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from someone who will tell it badly." Elizabeth set down her sewing. "Tell me." "There is a story going around." Margaret sat, pressed her hands together in her lap. "About you and Mr. Ashcroft. Specifically about the Caldwell dinner. About your conversation after the meal." "We spoke for perhaps 10 minutes in a room full of people." "Yes." Margaret looked at her steadily. "The story as it is currently circulating is that you sought him out, that you positioned yourself deliberately to be alone with him, and that you made him certain promises regarding your interest, in a manner that would be considered forward, aggressively so." Elizabeth stared at her. "That is not what happened." "I know it's not. I was in the room." Margaret held her gaze. "But I was not the one standing 6 feet away when the two of you were talking, with perfect sight lines and a gift for interpretation." Cecilia Whitmore. The name sat between them without needing to be said. "She's telling people I pursued him," Elizabeth said, improperly. "She's telling people that you are calculating," Margaret said carefully. "That the dance was deliberate. That the music at Hargrove House was deliberate. That the conversation at the Caldwell dinner was deliberate. That you have a design. On his name, his house, his money." She paused. "The word she hasn't said yet, but that is implied in every sentence, is fortune hunter." The words landed with precision and weight. Elizabeth felt the shape of what was being constructed brick by careful brick from materials that were mostly true and arranged to mean something entirely false. "I have to go speak to her," Elizabeth said. Elizabeth, not in anger. She was already standing, already thinking clearly, the way her father had taught her to think in a crisis. Identify the problem. Determine what you actually know. Decide what can be done. I need to understand what she thinks she's doing, and why. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of her," she said. It sounded like the beginning of an observation she hadn't entirely worked out yet. "I'm afraid of what happens if I do nothing," Elizabeth said. "That's not the same thing." She found Cecilia at Mrs. Hargrove's Thursday morning call, which half of Philadelphia's social women attended with the reliability of a church obligation. Cecilia was holding court near the window, a cup of tea balanced elegantly in one hand, when Elizabeth crossed the room and stopped in front of her with the same directness she had once used to cross a ballroom floor. Conversation in the immediate vicinity dimmed. "Miss Whitmore," Elizabeth said, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately. On the terrace, perhaps." Cecilia's expression registered the approach. Something moved behind her eyes, quick and recalibrating, and then the pleasant composure settled back into place like a well-worn mask. "Of course," she said with perfect social grace, on the terrace with the morning air and no audience worth performing for Cecilia's pleasantness thinned slightly at the edges. She set down her cup on the stone balustrade and looked at Elizabeth with something that was more honest and more complex than anything she'd shown inside. "I know what you're going to say," Cecilia said. "Then I'll be brief," Elizabeth said. "What you're telling people about me is not true. You were in that room. You know it's not true. And I'd like to understand why you're saying it anyway." A pause. The mask slipped fractionally. "You played the heighten beautifully," Cecilia said. It came out oddly, almost involuntarily, not a deflection exactly, but not an answer either. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, and waited. Cecilia turned slightly away toward the garden below. "He has never danced with anyone," she said finally. "Not once in 2 full seasons. I have been attending these events for 2 full seasons." She stopped. The sentence hung unfinished, and Elizabeth heard what wasn't said in it with sudden, unexpected clarity. "You wanted him to notice you," Elizabeth said quietly. Cecilia's jaw tightened. "I did not come here to be analyzed by a girl from Lancaster." "No," Elizabeth said. "But I think you came to that ballroom every season hoping he'd cross the floor the way I did. And when he didn't, when I did instead, you needed a reason for it that wasn't just—" "Don't!" Cecilia said sharply. Elizabeth stopped. A moment passed. A long one. "Stop the story," Elizabeth said. "Please, I have done nothing wrong. I don't intend to. And whatever your feelings are about Mr. Ashcroft, that is not something I caused." Cecilia said nothing, but the line of her shoulders had changed. Elizabeth picked up her own cup from where she'd set it, turned and went back inside. Her hands, she noticed, were entirely steady. What she did not see, what she had no way of seeing, was Nathaniel Ashcroft stepping away from the far end of the terrace where he had arrived on a separate errand and remained motionless through the entirety of the conversation. He had heard every word. He stood in the morning air for a long moment after Elizabeth had gone back inside. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come, his expression doing something complicated that no one was present to observe. He had heard every word. That was the thing Elizabeth did not know, and the thing that changed everything. She went through the following 2 days in her ordinary, careful way. Morning calls, letters to her father in Lancaster, practice at the pianoforte in the Spruce Street parlor that Constance had arranged for her use. She told herself the conversation with Cecilia had accomplished something. She wasn't certain what. But the story had not spread further, at least not visibly, and the invitations continued to arrive, and Philadelphia seemed for the moment to have redirected its collective attention toward a disputed inheritance in the Wentworth family that was considerably more interesting than one provincial girl's ambiguous dancing partner. She was beginning to think the worst might have passed. She was wrong. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Constance in a formal hand that belonged to the offices of Caldwell and Merritt, the most prominent legal firm in Philadelphia. And Constance read it at the breakfast table with an expression that did not change in any visible way, which was how Elizabeth knew it was serious. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked. Constance folded the letter precisely along its original creases. "It is a letter of inquiry," she said, "regarding your father's financial situation." Elizabeth set down her fork. "I beg your pardon. Specifically." Constance unfolded the letter again and read, "Regarding a promissory note held against your father's Lancaster property, dated 1809, maturing this autumn." She looked up. "Did you know about this?" Elizabeth felt the blood move away from her face. "No," she said. "I didn't." She wrote to her father that afternoon. His reply arrived 4 days later in his steady physician's hand that she had always found reassuring and was not reassuring at all. "My dear Elizabeth, I did not wish to trouble you with this before the season. The note exists. It was taken out to cover your mother's final illness, the treatments the physicians from Baltimore, the things I tried. It comes due in October. I have some means to address it, but not all. I am managing. Do not let this cast a shadow on your time in the city. Your father." She sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. Her father was managing, which meant he was not managing. which meant she had come to Philadelphia thinking she was simply there for a season of experience, while behind her in Lancaster, the house she had grown up in, was 3 months from being in genuine danger. She didn't tell Constance everything. She told her enough. Constance listened in the way she always listened, completely. Still nothing on her face, and then said, "We need to understand the full scope of it before we do anything. I'll make inquiries." "Who holds the note?" Elizabeth asked. Constance looked at her steadily. "That," she said, "is precisely what we need to find out." She found out on Thursday. Margaret brought her the information because Margaret, for all her bright and sunny surface, had a network of social knowledge that functioned like a finely calibrated instrument. She arrived at Spruce Street with her bonnet still half-tied and her expression doing something between discomfort and urgency. "I have to tell you something," she said for the second time in 2 weeks. "And again, I want you to hear it from me." "Tell me," Elizabeth said. "The promissory note on your father's property," Margaret said. "I asked. I quietly, carefully asked, and I found out." She pressed her hands together. "It's held by Harlan Whitmore, Cecilia's father." Elizabeth heard it, let it settle, felt the shape of it arrange itself into something she hadn't expected, but now that it was in front of her, somehow was not entirely surprised by. "How long has he held it?" she asked. Her voice was even. She was her father's daughter. "Since 1810, Margaret said. "He acquired it from the original creditor. It was a quiet transaction, not the kind of thing that gets discussed." She looked at Elizabeth with genuine distress. "Elizabeth, I don't know if Cecilia knows. I don't know if any of it is connected. But I thought—" "You were right to tell me," Elizabeth said. "Thank you." After Margaret left, Elizabeth sat alone in the parlor and thought with the particular cold clarity that comes when emotion and practical necessity arrange themselves on opposite sides of a problem, and you understand that only one of them gets to speak first. Harlan Whitmore held her father's debt. Cecilia Whitmore had spent weeks constructing a version of Elizabeth that would make her unwelcome in exactly the circles where she might have found help or information or recourse. Whether or not that was coordinated, whether Cecilia knew whether this was strategy or coincidence, the effect was the same. Elizabeth needed to find out. And she needed to be careful about how she found out, because the wrong move would cost her what little ground she had. She went to Eleanor Ashcroft, not because Eleanor could solve it, but because Eleanor was the sharpest observer Elizabeth had yet encountered in this city, had lived in it for 60-plus years, and knew every current that ran beneath its polished social surface. Elizabeth arrived at Ashcroft House without sending a note ahead, which was irregular, and asked the butler if Mrs. Ashcroft might be available to receive her, which was bold, and was shown in within 5 minutes, which told her something about the kind of woman Eleanor was. "You look like your father taught you to think," Eleanor said when Elizabeth was seated. "Which means something has happened, and you've already begun working it out." "I need information," Elizabeth said directly. "And I think you may have it. Ask." "Harlan Whitmore," Elizabeth said. "Tell me about him." Eleanor's face didn't change, but her hands folded in her lap, stilled in a way that was itself information. "Why?" she said. "He holds a debt against my father's property. It matures in October, and his daughter has spent the last month ensuring that my reputation in this city is as damaged as possible." Elizabeth met Eleanor's eyes. "I don't know if those facts are related, but they exist simultaneously, and I'd like to understand what I'm dealing with." Eleanor looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then she said, "Close the door, please." Elizabeth closed it. "Harlan Whitmore," Eleanor said, "is a man who has built a very considerable fortune through a very particular method. He identifies families with property and temporary financial difficulty. He acquires their debt quietly through intermediaries, and then he waits. If they recover, he collects with interest. If they don't—" She paused. "He has acquired 4 properties in the last decade in exactly this manner. None of it is illegal. All of it is—" she chose the word carefully, predatory. "And his daughter—" Elizabeth asked. Cecilia knows her father's business, Eleanor said. She has grown up in it. She understands what it means when a name becomes attached to one of her father's interests. She stopped again. Her eyes were direct and not unkind. Whether she knew about your father specifically, I cannot tell you. But she knows the system. Elizabeth breathed. In, out. I need to see the terms of the note, she said. I need to know exactly what my father owes and when, and whether there is any legitimate ground on which to challenge the acquisition. That will require a lawyer, Eleanor said. I know. I also know that a provincial girl from Lancaster, walking into Caldwell and Merritt asking questions about Harlan Whitmore's financial dealings, will be turned out inside 10 minutes. She looked at Eleanor. I am asking if you know someone who will take my inquiry seriously. Eleanor studied her. You are asking quite a lot for someone who has been in this city 5 weeks. I know, Elizabeth said. I'm sorry, I don't have a great deal of time. Another long silence. Then Eleanor reached for the small writing table at her side and picked up a pen. Thomas Hale, she said, writing. He was my husband's attorney for 30 years. He is principled, careful, and he owes me a considerable courtesy. She held out the folded paper. Tell him I sent you. He'll see you. Elizabeth took it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Eleanor settled back. There's something else you should know. Elizabeth waited. My son, Eleanor said, was on the Hargrove Terrace on Thursday morning. He arrived to return a set of documents to Mr. Hargrove and came around the garden side. He heard your conversation with Cecilia. The room went very still. All of it? Elizabeth asked. All of it. Eleanor's gaze was steady. He came home and did not speak at dinner, which for Nathaniel means something has occupied him entirely. He left early Friday morning for the Delaware property and returned this morning. He has not explained himself. She paused. I am telling you this because I think you deserve to know that someone heard what you said to her and what you didn't say, and the manner in which you conducted yourself when you believed no one was watching. Elizabeth did not know what to do with that information. She took it and held it carefully the way one holds something fragile and did not yet look at it directly. I should go, she said. I have an appointment to arrange. Yes, Eleanor said. You do. And then as Elizabeth stood, Miss Fairchild, you came into this room and asked me for help without pretending you didn't need it. Do you know how rarely someone does that? I've found, Elizabeth said, that pretending you don't need help mostly just delays getting it. Eleanor made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, a real one. Go, she said. Come back and tell me what Thomas says. Thomas Hale received her the following morning in a quiet office that smelled of paper and order, and listened to everything she told him with the focused attention of a man who did not waste time forming conclusions before the evidence was complete. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The acquisition of the note, he said, is a matter of record. Whitmore purchased it through an intermediary firm called Bracewell and Associates, a name that appears in my experience more often than is coincidental in connection with his interests. He steepled his hands. Whether the transfer was proper depends on the original terms. I'd need to see the original document. Can you get it? With some effort, yes. Notes of this type are registered instruments. There's a process. He looked at her carefully. Miss Fairchild, if what you're suggesting, whether intentionally or by implication, is that there is something improper about the way this note was acquired, you understand that making such a claim against Harlan Whitmore in this city carries significant risk. I understand, she said. He has considerable influence, legal, social, financial. He is not a man who responds to challenge without consequence. I understand that too, she said. But my father's house may be taken from him in October based on a debt that was possibly acquired under circumstances that deserve examination. I'd like to at least understand what those circumstances are before I decide what can be done. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the ledger on his desk. I'll need 2 weeks, he said. Come back then. She walked out of his office into the Philadelphia summer and stood for a moment on the step, feeling the heat press down and the city move around her, and told herself firmly that 2 weeks was manageable. 2 weeks was time. She did not see Nathaniel Ashcroft standing on the opposite corner until he spoke. "Miss Fairchild." She turned. He was there, which seemed impossible, and also somehow not surprising at all. He was in his working clothes again, the way she had come to associate with the version of him that was most real. No social performance. No occasion-appropriate formality. "Mr. Ashcroft?" She gathered herself. "This is unexpected." "I know Thomas Hale's office is on this street," he said. "I also know my mother sent you to him. She told me this morning." He paused. "She thought I ought to know." Elizabeth looked at him. "Did she?" She said. He stopped. Started again with the slight roughness of a man who has prepared what he means to say and finds in the moment that it sounds different than he planned. "She said that you came to her for help and asked for it plainly and didn't apologize for needing it, and that I should consider the full picture of what that means." "Your mother," Elizabeth said carefully, "is a very perceptive woman. She is." His jaw was set in a way she was learning to read not anger, but the effort of saying something that did not come easily. "I was on the Hargrove Terrace," he said. "Last Thursday. I heard what you said to Cecilia." "I know, your mother told me." Something crossed his face. "Of course she did." He looked at her. "You told her that you hadn't caused whatever she felt about me. You said it without cruelty, to a woman who had been deliberately damaging you for weeks." He stopped. "Most people would not have done that." "She was unhappy," Elizabeth said simply. "What she was doing was wrong. But the reason she was doing it wasn't—" She paused. "You can be wrong about your methods without being wrong about your feelings. I didn't think she deserved cruelty on top of disappointment." He was quiet for a moment that went on long enough that she felt it in her chest. "The note," he said, "on your father's property." "It's being examined," she said. "Thomas Hale is looking into the acquisition terms. I don't yet know what will come of it." "Harlan Whitmore," Nathaniel said, and his voice had changed a flatness entering it specific and deliberate, "is a man I have had cause to examine before, in connection with another family, 2 years ago." He looked at her directly. "The Voss family. Margaret's family." Elizabeth stared at him. "Margaret. Her father's property in Chester County. Whitmore acquired the debt through Bracewell and Associates. The Voss family recovered narrowly before the note matured, but Thomas Hale assisted them. He would have the documentation of the method already, which is likely why my mother sent you to him." He paused. "She knows the full history. She knew it before you walked into her sitting room." Elizabeth felt the structure of the last several weeks rearrange itself around this new piece of information. Eleanor's immediate attention, the specific referral, the quiet efficiency of it all. "She was already watching for it," Elizabeth said slowly. "She knew Whitmore's pattern." "She has known his pattern for years," Nathaniel said. "She's been waiting for someone to walk through her door with the right set of facts in the right order." His gaze on her was direct and complicated. "You provided them." The street moved around them, a cart passing, voices from across the way, the ordinary noise of the city going about its business entirely unconcerned with the conversation happening on Thomas Hale's corner. "Mr. Ashcroft," Elizabeth said carefully, "are you telling me that your mother orchestrated this, the referral, the information?" "I'm telling you," he said, "that my mother has been looking for a way to bring Harlan Whitmore's methods into proper legal examination for 2 years, and that you walked into her house with exactly the leverage she needed, and that she is not the kind of woman who fails to recognize leverage when it sits down across from her and plays hide-and." Elizabeth thought about the visit. The shawl, the folded hands, the question about the Scottish air, the warmth that had seemed so natural and so genuine, all of which had been genuine, and also calculated. "I like her," Elizabeth said, and meant it entirely. Something happened to Nathaniel's expression then. Something that was not quite the shift she had seen before, not that careful, controlled, almost smile. This was fuller, and he did not seem to catch it before it showed. "She likes you," he said. "That is not a common occurrence." They stood on the street corner in the Philadelphia summer, and Elizabeth was aware that something was happening between them that was different from all the careful distances and deliberate formalities that the city and the season and the weeks of managed proximity had compressed into this moment on an ordinary street corner, and the space between them was doing something it had not done before. "I should go back," she said. "Constance will be expecting me." "Yes," he said. He didn't move. "Miss Fairchild." "Yes." He looked at her with the directness that was entirely his own, unhurried, undeflected, saying exactly what it meant. "When Thomas Hale has his findings," he said, "I would like to know what they are, not because I can," he stopped, chose words, not out of obligation, "but because I'd like to know." "I'll tell you," she said. She walked away down the street. She did not look back. But she was aware, with the certainty of something felt rather than observed, that he stood on that corner and watched her go. Constance was in fact expecting her. She was also, which was unusual, not alone. Seated in the Spruce Street parlor, cup of tea balanced with the ease of a woman entirely comfortable in any room she chose to enter, was Cecilia Whitmore. Elizabeth stopped in the doorway. Cecilia looked up. Her expression was not what Elizabeth expected. Not the composed, calibrated pleasantness she deployed like a tool. Something else, something that sat uneasily on her features, as though she had not entirely decided what it was. "I asked your aunt if I might wait," Cecilia said. "I have something I need to say to you." Constance rose. "I'll see to tea," she said, which was Constance's language for, "I will remove myself from this room and also listen through the door." Elizabeth sat, waited. Cecilia set down her cup. "I told my father," she said, "that you were asking questions." Elizabeth went very still. "Before you had asked them," Cecilia continued, "I heard through my own network that you had been to see Thomas Hale. And I told my father." She looked at her hands. "He doesn't know yet that you've spoken to Hale specifically. He knows you're inquiring. He will move when he knows the rest. He moves quickly when he feels threatened." She looked up. "I'm telling you this because what I did with the stories was wrong. I knew it was wrong. And I told my father about your inquiries before I fully understood what you were actually doing and what he might do in response, and now She stopped. "I wanted you to know, so you can be careful." Elizabeth looked at her for a long time. "Why?" she said. "Why tell me?" Cecilia's composure cracked briefly at the edges. "Because I heard what you said about me on the terrace," she said quietly. "To him. About feelings and methods. And because no one has ever—" She stopped again. "No one has spoken about me that way before, like I was someone with reasons instead of just—" She pressed her lips together. "I'm not your friend, Miss Fairchild. I don't know if I can be, but I'm not. I didn't understand what my father would do, and now I do." The parlor was quiet. Elizabeth made a decision. "How quickly does your father move?" she asked. Cecilia blinked. "Within days, usually. Once he identifies a threat." "Then we don't have 2 weeks," Elizabeth said. She stood. "I need to get a message to Thomas Hale today." Elizabeth didn't wait for Constance to come back with the tea. She wrote the note to Thomas Hale, standing at the parlor writing table, with Cecilia watching and not speaking, and sealed it before the ink was fully dry. "Can your driver take this?" she asked Cecilia. Cecilia blinked a genuine blink, the kind that meant she had not expected to be immediately put to use. "Yes," she said after a half-second. "Yes, he can." "Then please send him now. I need Hale to have it before end of day." Cecilia took the note and went to the door without another word. Elizabeth heard her speaking to someone in the hall, heard the front door open and close, and stood very still in the parlor, with her hands pressed flat on the writing table, and let herself feel for exactly 15 seconds the full weight of what she was dealing with. Then she stopped feeling it and began thinking. Constance appeared in the doorway with the tea tray and the expression of a woman who had heard everything through the wall and was waiting to be informed officially. Elizabeth told her, quickly without embellishment. Constance set the tray down, poured 2 cups with perfect steadiness, and handed one to Elizabeth. "So Harlan Whitmore will move against the inquiry," Constance said. "Within days, according to his daughter. And Hale needs less than 2 weeks to establish what he needs." "He said 2 weeks. I don't know if he can do it faster." "He'll have to." Constance sat. "What exactly are you hoping Hale finds?" Elizabeth wrapped both hands around the cup. "Proof that the acquisition of the note was improper. Bracewell and Associates Nathaniel told me they were involved in the Voss matter too. If the same intermediary was used in the same pattern, Hale may already have documents that establish the method. What he needs now is confirmation that my father's note fits the same structure." She paused. "If it does, it's not just my father's debt at risk. It's a pattern, and patterns are actionable." Constance was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking like a lawyer." "I've been thinking like my father," Elizabeth said. "He always said that when you can't treat the symptom directly, find the system producing it." "And Nathaniel Ashcroft," Constance said, in a tone that was completely neutral, and therefore not neutral at all. "You mentioned he spoke to you outside Hale's office." "He did." "And told you about the Voss matter." "Yes." "Which means he has knowledge of Whitmore's methods from direct prior experience." Constance turned her cup in its saucer. "Elizabeth, that man is not standing at corners outside lawyers' offices by coincidence." Elizabeth knew that. She had known it since the corner. She hadn't yet decided what to do with knowing it. "One thing at a time," she said. Thomas Hale sent a reply by 7 that evening. It was 2 sentences. "I understand the urgency. Come tomorrow at 8. She was there at 5 minutes before 8, and Hale was already at his desk with papers arranged in the particular organized density of a man who had not stopped working since her note arrived. He looked up when she came in, and something in his expression told her he had found something. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Bracewell and Associates," he said, "is not a legitimate brokerage firm. It is a shell, a legal fiction created in 1806 and used exclusively to facilitate the transfer of distressed debt instruments into Harlan Whitmore's personal holdings. I knew this from the Voss matter. What I did not know until last night," he turned a paper to face her, "is how many notes have passed through it." Elizabeth looked at the paper. There were 8 names on it. She recognized 3 of them. Lancaster family's provincial names. The kind of names that did not appear at Philadelphia galas because they couldn't afford the carriage fare down. 8 families, she said. "That I can document," Hale said. "There may be more, but 8 is sufficient. What Whitmore has been doing is acquiring distressed notes at discounted rates through a concealed intermediary, then calling them in at full value at maturity, often after quietly ensuring that the debtor family's recovery efforts are impeded." He stopped. "In the Voss case, I could not prove the impediment. I could only prove the acquisition structure. But your situation has given me something the Voss case did not." "What?" Elizabeth asked. "Cecilia Whitmore's knowledge," he said. "If she is willing to attest, even informally in a sworn deposition, that her father's response to your inquiry was to prepare immediate defensive action that constitutes evidence of awareness of impropriety. A man with a clean conscience does not mobilize within days of learning someone is asking questions." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "She came to warn me," she said. "I don't know if she'll be willing to go further than that." "That," Hale said, "is what you need to find out today." She left his office and sent a note to Cecilia directly, because there was no longer time for the careful social choreography of morning calls and intermediaries. The note was plain. "I need to speak with you privately. This morning, if possible. Thomas Hale's office or wherever you choose. It is important. E. Fairchild." The reply came back within the hour. "My father's garden house. 11 o'clock. Come alone." Constance did not like that. She said so with the particular clipped economy of a woman who had strong objections and had decided to express them efficiently. Elizabeth heard her out, agreed with most of the objections, and went anyway. Cecilia was waiting in the garden house, with the tense, upright posture of a woman who had spent the intervening hours in considerable internal conflict. She looked at Elizabeth when she came in and said without preamble, "My father knows you went back to Hale this morning." Elizabeth stopped. "Already? He has people." Cecilia's jaw was set. "He doesn't know what Hale has found, but he knows you went urgently. He's meeting with his own attorneys this afternoon." She looked at her hands, then back up. "What do you need from me?" Elizabeth told her. Clearly directly the way she told everyone things, because clarity had served her better in this city than any other tool she'd brought with her. Cecilia listened. Her expression moved through several things: recognition, discomfort, something that was closer to fear than Elizabeth had yet seen on her face, and then settled into a stillness that was different from her usual composure. Less managed, more real. "You're asking me to provide a deposition," Cecilia said. "Against my father. I'm asking you to attest to what you observed. What you told me yesterday, that he mobilized immediately when he heard I was inquiring. That's not an opinion. That's a fact you witnessed." "He will cut me off entirely," Cecilia said. "Financially, socially. He will—" She stopped. Her voice was level, but the effort of keeping it level was visible. "He is the only family I have left. My mother passed 4 years ago. There are no brothers. I am entirely dependent on his continued goodwill." Elizabeth heard it. She heard the shape of the life Cecilia had been living, the performance of social authority as the only leverage available to a woman with no independent ground of her own. She heard it, and she felt it, and she did not dismiss it. "I know what I'm asking," Elizabeth said quietly. "I won't pretend I don't." Cecilia looked at her. "Why should I risk everything for your father's property?" "You shouldn't," Elizabeth said. If that were all it was. She held Cecilia's gaze. "But there are 8 families on Thomas Hale's list. Lancaster families, provincial families, people who had no Philadelphia connections, no one to ask questions on their behalf, no one who knew what Bracewell and Associates was or what it was doing. Your father will keep doing this. He'll keep doing it until someone stops him. I can't stop him alone. Hale can't stop him without documentation. And you," she paused. "You already know it's wrong. You've known it. I think that's why you came to warn me." The garden house was very quiet. "If he cuts me off," Cecilia said, "if I have nothing—" "You'll have done something true," Elizabeth said. "I know that sounds thin. Against financial security. But I think you'll have done something you can live with. And I'm not certain you can say the same about the alternative." Another silence. Long enough that Elizabeth was not certain which direction it would fall. Then Cecilia said very quietly, "I want it in writing, whatever Hale produces. My name attached to a factual account, not speculation. I won't overstate what I know." "That's exactly what he needs," Elizabeth said. "And I want—" Cecilia stopped, started again. "If this works, if it actually resolves, I want your word that you'll tell people I came forward, not what I did before, what I did after." Elizabeth looked at her steadily. "You have it," she said. "Entirely." Cecilia nodded once, tightly. The way a person nods when they've made an irreversible decision and are not quite sure yet how they feel about being irreversible. They went to Hale together that afternoon. Cecilia gave her account to Hale in a composed, precise deposition that lasted 40 minutes and contained exactly what she had promised. Facts observed directly stated, without embellishment. When it was done, she sat in the chair across from Hale's desk, with the expression of a woman who had just set down something very heavy and was not yet sure what her arms felt like without it. Hale looked at Elizabeth over the papers. "This is sufficient," he said. "Combined with the documentation from the Voss matter and the acquisition records, this is a viable case. I'll need 3 days to prepare the formal filing." "What are we filing?" Elizabeth asked. "A petition to the Court of Common Pleas, challenging the legitimacy of the Bracewell transfer on grounds of concealed interest and predatory acquisition." He paused. "It will not be quiet. Once it's filed, Whitmore will know immediately, and he will respond. I know, Elizabeth said. File it. She walked out of Hale's office into the afternoon heat and stood on the steps and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, not yet, because nothing was resolved. But the particular solid sensation of having placed all her weight on a floor she had tested carefully and finding it held. Nathaniel was not on the corner this time. She had not expected him to be. She walked back toward Spruce Street alone, and she was 3 blocks from home when she heard her name. She turned. He was behind her, not dramatically, not breathlessly, just there on the same street, as though the city kept arranging these collisions because it had decided they were necessary. I heard you went back to Hale this morning, he said. Does everyone in this city know my schedule? Thomas Hale sent me a note, Nathaniel said. He asked if I was willing to add the Ashcroft family's documentation from the Voss matter formally to the filing. He paused. I said yes, 2 hours ago. Elizabeth stared at him. He didn't tell me that. I asked him not to yet. I wanted to. He stopped. That particular roughness again, the sound of a man who has prepared and finds preparation insufficient. I wanted to tell you myself. She looked at him in the afternoon light. This man who maintained careful distances and measured his words, and had nevertheless been, she now understood, not absent from this situation, but quietly, steadily present in it from the moment on the terrace, from the corner outside Hale's office, from the conversation with his mother that he had clearly known more about than he'd initially revealed. Mr. Ashcroft, she said, how long have you been involved in this? He met her eyes. Since the morning after the Hargrove Gala, he said. When I went to my mother and told her about a provincial girl from Lancaster who had crossed a ballroom floor and told me the truth, and she told me in her way that I ought to pay attention. He paused. I've been paying attention. Elizabeth absorbed this. All of it. The full shape of it. And the corner outside Hale's office, she said. That wasn't coincidence. No, he said, simply, and your mother's immediate referral. She had been waiting for a case with the right combination of elements. You provided them. But she also... He stopped. His jaw did the thing it did when he was saying something that cost him something. She told me you were worth knowing. That is not language my mother uses about anyone. Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment. You should have told me, she said, from the beginning, that you knew about Whitmore, that you and your mother were... I know, he said. I didn't know how to offer help to someone who... He paused. You don't make it easy to help you. You walk into every room and solve it yourself before anyone can offer. That's not... She stopped, thought about it honestly. That may be partly accurate, she admitted. Something crossed his face, that fuller thing, the one he hadn't caught in time on the street corner before. I wasn't entirely sure, he said, whether you'd want it, the help, from me specifically. Why wouldn't I? He looked at her steadily. Because accepting help from me means in this city accepting a particular set of assumptions about why, and I did not want you to feel that I was... He searched for words. I did not want it to look like leverage, or like something you owed me after. Elizabeth understood what he was saying. She understood it completely, because he was right that in Philadelphia those things mattered, and because the care with which he had held back, staying at the edges, offering through intermediaries, making sure she moved on her own terms, was itself a kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she'd asked. It doesn't look like that, she said quietly. It looks like someone who paid attention and then helped carefully. Those are different things. He nodded. Once. The same deliberate nod she had catalogued earlier, the one that meant something. The filing goes in 3 days, she said. What happens after that will be complicated, he said. Yes, Whitmore will challenge it. There will be hearings. It will take time. He paused. But Hale is good. And the documentation is substantial. And another pause weighted differently. Your father's property will not be touched while the matter is before the court. That's standard practice. It buys him time regardless of outcome. Elizabeth felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since Tuesday morning, and the letter on the breakfast table. "He doesn't know any of this is happening," she said. "My father. He thinks I'm here having a pleasant season." "Will you tell him?" "Not until there's something definite to tell." She looked at Nathaniel. "He spent 3 years protecting me from the reality of my mother's illness. I reckon I can return the courtesy for a few more weeks." The faintest possible smile moved across Nathaniel Ashcroft's face. Not the restrained almost thing she had catalogued before. Something genuine and unhurried and entirely his. "You reckon," he said. "I've been in Pennsylvania long enough," she said, and the lightness in her own voice surprised her. They stood on the street in the afternoon heat, and she was aware that the distance between them had become something different from what it had been at the Hargrove Gala. Not smaller exactly, but different in quality, more deliberate on both sides. "The Wentworth dinner is Friday," he said. "I know. My aunt has accepted. I'll be there." He said it the way he said most things, without performance, without the social elaboration that would have made it easy to misread. Just the fact of it offered plainly. "I would like to speak with you again." "Then I'll make sure," Elizabeth said, "not to be monopolized by Mrs. Dunmore before you get the chance." The smile again. Fully this time, and she felt it like a key turning. She walked home, and this time she did look back. Just once at the corner. He was still there. He raised his hand, a small gesture, an acknowledgement, the kind of thing that meant everything and nothing, depending on who was watching. She turned forward and kept walking, and the city moved around her like it always had. Loud and indifferent and full of consequence, and Elizabeth Fairchild walked through the middle of it, feeling for the first time since she had arrived that she was not a visitor navigating someone else's territory. She was precisely where she was supposed to be. Constance had supper waiting, and unusually a glass of sherry poured and set at Elizabeth's place before she had even removed her bonnet. Elizabeth sat down, looked at the sherry, looked at her aunt. "Thomas Hale sent a note," Constance said, settling into her own chair, with the deliberate composure of a woman delivering significant information in the manner of someone discussing the weather. "The filing is ready ahead of schedule. He believes he can submit it tomorrow rather than in 3 days." She picked up her fork. Apparently, Mr. Ashcroft's documentation was more comprehensive than expected. It accelerated the preparation considerably. "Nathaniel told me he'd submitted it," Elizabeth said. "Did he?" Constance took a precise bite. "And how is Mr. Ashcroft?" "He's well." "I imagine he is." A pause. "Elizabeth, I have been your father's sister for 30 years and your chaperone for this season, and I have attempted throughout to discharge both responsibilities with appropriate restraint." She set down her fork. "But I am going to say this once plainly, and then not say it again." She looked at her niece directly. "That man has been quietly present in your corner since the first week of this season. He has done so without announcement and without expectation of acknowledgement. Whatever Philadelphia chooses to make of the dancing and the street corners and the legal documentation, I am your aunt, and what I observe is a man behaving toward you with uncommon integrity." She picked her fork back up. "That is all I will say." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Aunt Constance." "Don't thank me," Constance said crisply. "Eat your supper." The filing went in the following morning. By noon, Harlan Whitmore knew. And by 3 o'clock the message arrived at Spruce Street, not through a lawyer, not through a social intermediary, but directly in Whitmore's own hand, addressed to Elizabeth. Constance handed it to her without opening it. Elizabeth broke the seal. It read, "Miss Fairchild, you have made a significant miscalculation. I would advise you to consider carefully what you stand to lose before this proceeds further. H. Whitmore." Elizabeth read it once. Then she set it on the table beside her supper plate, picked up her fork, and said, "We'll need to send a copy of this to Thomas Hale in the morning. A man who threatens the opposing party directly the day a filing is submitted has given us something useful." Constance looked at the letter, then at her niece. Then she picked up her own fork. "Yes," she said. "I expect he has." Thomas Hale's response to the letter arrived before breakfast the following morning. It was 4 words. "Keep it. Don't reply." Elizabeth had not intended to reply, but she understood reading those 4 words that Hale had seen something in Whitmore's direct approach that confirmed what they already suspected, that a man who sent personal threats the same afternoon a legal filing was submitted was a man who believed intimidation was faster than litigation, which meant he was not certain the litigation would fail. That was the first piece of solid ground she had stood on in weeks. Constance forwarded the letter to Hale by 9. By 10, Elizabeth was dressed and had written to her father, not the full truth, but a truthful version of it, that she had engaged a Philadelphia attorney to examine the terms of the promissory note on his behalf, that the matter was proceeding carefully, and that he was not to worry. She sealed it and gave it to the post, and stood in the hallway afterward, feeling the particular weight of being someone's child, and also someone's advocate, simultaneously, and understanding for the first time how much her father must have felt that weight in reverse during her mother's illness. She had no time to sit with it. Margaret arrived at 11 with pink cheeks and breathless news. "Everyone knows," Margaret said before her bonnet was off. "The filing. Everyone in Philadelphia knows. It was in conversation at the Aldridge breakfast this morning. Whitmore's name, Bracewell and Associates, your father's note. Someone talked." "Hale?" Elizabeth asked. "No. Hale would never." Margaret pressed her lips together. "I think it was Cecilia." Elizabeth went still. "What?" "Not maliciously, or I don't believe maliciously, but she was at the Aldridge breakfast and she was different. She looked like someone who had stopped performing and wasn't sure what to do with her face now that it was just her face, and Mrs. Aldridge asked her directly about her father, and Cecilia said—" Margaret paused, clearly reconstructing the exact words. She said, "My father has conducted business in ways that I was not aware of and do not endorse." And then she didn't say anything else. But that was sufficient. Elizabeth sat down, slowly. "The whole room understood it," Margaret continued, "because everyone knows the filing happened. And then Cecilia Whitmore in Aldridge's breakfast room distancing herself from her father's business in front of 12 of Philadelphia's most talkative women." She sat across from Elizabeth. "By afternoon, this will be everywhere." Elizabeth thought about Cecilia's face in the garden house, the tightness of the nod, the way she had said, "He is the only family I have left," the way she had walked into Hale's office anyway. "She did it publicly," Elizabeth said almost to herself. "She did it publicly," Margaret confirmed, "which means she can't take it back, and neither can he." A pause. "Elizabeth, are you all right?" "Yes." Elizabeth straightened. "Yes, I need to get to Hale." Hale already knew by the time she arrived. He was standing when she came in, which she had not seen him do before, and he had the expression of a man rapidly reassessing a timeline. "Whitmore will move today," he said. "Not in 3 days. Today. Now that it's public, he cannot afford to wait, delay Reed's as admission. He'll challenge the filing directly and simultaneously attempt a social campaign to discredit the petition." He looked at her. "He'll go after you personally. Your father's finances, your family's standing, your reasons for being in this city. Everything he can reach." "Let him," Elizabeth said. Hale blinked. "Miss Fairchild. Mr. Hale." She sat down because she thought more clearly sitting. "He threatened me by letter yesterday afternoon. He sent it to my home address, in his own hand, the same day you filed. That letter says everything about his character that anyone needs to know. Let him run a social campaign against a provincial girl from Lancaster who is trying to protect her father's home. Let Philadelphia watch him do it." She held Hale's gaze. "You said the documentation is substantial. Is it sufficient to win in the Court of Common Pleas?" "If the court hears it fairly, yes. The acquisition structure through Bracewell is demonstrably a concealed interest transaction. It fails under established property law." "Then we hold," she said. "We don't retreat, We don't qualify, and we don't let him reframe this as a personal dispute. This is a legal matter with documented evidence. We treat it exactly as that." Hale looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "You've been thinking about this since the letter," he said. "Since before the letter," she said. "I've been thinking about it since my father told me not to worry." She left Hale's office and found Nathaniel waiting outside. Not on the corner this time, directly outside on the step, in the uncomplicated manner of a man who had stopped managing his proximity and decided simply to be where he intended to be. "I heard about the Aldridge breakfast," he said. "So did everyone," Elizabeth said. "Cecilia Whitmore just publicly broke with her father's business," Nathaniel said. "In this city, that is not a small thing. That is, he stopped searching. That is a woman burning the only bridge she had." "I know," Elizabeth said quietly. She knew it too. He looked at her, that direct, unhurried look. "You told her she'd have done something true," he said. "She told me. This morning. She came to Ashcroft House." Elizabeth stared at him. "She came to you." "She came to my mother initially. Then she spoke to me." He paused. "She wanted to know. She asked if my intentions toward you were genuine." His jaw was doing the thing it did. "She said that if they weren't, she was going to make my life considerably difficult." In those words, Elizabeth stood on the step in the Philadelphia morning and felt something entirely unexpected rising in her chest, something warm and a little unsteady, the way warmth sometimes is when it arrives in a place that has been cold for a long time. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "I told her," Nathaniel said, "that I had not made my intentions fully clear to the relevant party yet, and that I intended to remedy that shortly." A pause. "She said that was a very long way of saying yes." "It is," Elizabeth agreed. He looked at her steadily. "I would like to call on you formally," he said, "with Constance present, in the proper manner, when this legal matter has resolved sufficiently that it cannot be interpreted as connected. I don't want anything I do to complicate what you're building." "Nathaniel," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither of them acknowledged it directly, but she saw it register the slight stillness, the focused attention. "The legal matter may take months. You said so yourself." "I know. I'm not willing to wait months to—" She stopped, collected herself. "You've been paying attention since the first week. So have I. I'd prefer not to spend the rest of the season pretending otherwise on grounds of propriety." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," she said, "that you come to supper on Thursday, with Constance present, in the proper manner, and we begin there." The smile, full, unhurried entirely, his arrived without reservation for the second time. "Thursday," he said. Yes. She was back at Spruce Street by noon. By 2, the first indication of Whitmore's counter-campaign arrived in the form of a morning caller Elizabeth had never met. A Mrs. Price, thin and well-dressed, who arrived with the barely concealed avidity of a woman on an information mission, and spent 25 minutes asking Elizabeth in tones of great concern about her father's financial situation, her reasons for coming to Philadelphia, and whether it was true she had been making inquiries into the private business of several prominent families. Constance answered most of it, crisply, without warmth, and with the specific talent of a woman who could deflect intrusive questions while appearing to answer them. When Mrs. Price left, Elizabeth looked at her aunt. "That's one," Constance said. "There will be others." There were 3 more that week. Each one sent Elizabeth was increasingly certain as an emissary of deliberate social pressure, each one probing different edges of Elizabeth's situation. She answered what she answered, deflected what she deflected, and sent full accounts to Hale after each visit. On Friday, Hale sent word that Whitmore had filed a counter-motion challenging the standing of the petition on the grounds that Elizabeth, as a non-resident, had no proper claim as petitioner. It was a technical argument, and Hale described it in his note as thin but time-consuming, which she understood to mean it was designed not to win but to delay. On Friday evening, she went to the Wentworth dinner. She had considered not going, had considered whether the social exposure was worth it while Whitmore's campaign was active, and then decided that retreating from Philadelphia's social calendar while Whitmore remained present in it was precisely what he wanted her to do. She went. She wore her best dress. She held her head level and smiled at the people she liked and was courteous to the people she didn't, and was careful not to speak about the legal matter to anyone except Margaret briefly in a corner where she confirmed only that it was proceeding. Nathaniel was there. He did not make a production of finding her. He simply, at a particular point in the evening, was beside her in the way he had been beside her at the Caldwell dinner and on street corners and outside lawyers' offices, quietly, steadily, without announcement. "How are you holding up?" he asked, low enough that it was only for her. "Better than Whitmore would prefer," she said. "Good." He was quiet a moment. "His counter-motion won't succeed. Hale filed a response this afternoon, establishing your standing through your father's direct interest in the petitioned instrument. The technical argument falls. You've been speaking with Hale." "I've been speaking with Hale," he confirmed with the composure of a man who saw no reason to apologize for it. "He keeps me informed. I asked him to." She looked at him sideways. "You asked him to before or after I engaged him?" "After. Immediately after." The faintest possible pause. "I wanted to know you had what you needed." She absorbed that. The full specific weight of it, a man who had watched from the edges and then made quiet arrangements to ensure the machinery was working, not to control it, but to make certain it didn't fail her for lack of resource. "Thursday supper," she said. "Thursday supper," he said. And something in the way he said it, the steadiness, the warmth underneath the steadiness, made it sound less like a social arrangement and more like a promise. The countermotion fell the following Tuesday. Hale's response had been in his words definitive. The court found Elizabeth's standing established and the original filing intact. The substantive hearing was set for September 6 weeks away, which meant the property was protected from any action until the matter resolved. Elizabeth wrote to her father that evening and told him everything. The full truth, start to finish without softening. She wrote it in one long sitting and sealed it before she could rethink the length of it, and she felt when it was done the particular exhausted lightness of having put down a weight she had been carrying at an angle to keep it from showing. His reply came in 4 days fast, which meant he had sat down to write it the moment he finished reading. "My dear Elizabeth, I have read your letter 3 times. I do not have words sufficient for what you have done, so I will not attempt sufficient words. I will say only that your mother would have understood you completely, and that I am beginning to understand you in ways I did not before you left for Philadelphia. Whatever the court decides in September, you have already won something I cannot name, but am enormously grateful for. Your father." She was in the Spruce Street parlor when she read it alone in the morning before Constance was up, and she allowed herself for a few minutes to simply feel it, the grief for her mother that was always present underneath everything, the love for her father that had driven the whole of the summer, the long specific exhaustion of fighting for something with everything you had when no one had asked you to. Then she set the letter carefully in the small box she kept for things she intended to keep and went to put the kettle on. Thursday supper at Spruce Street was by any social measure a modest affair. Constance cooked, because Constance trusted no one else with her kitchen when it mattered. And the table was set for 3, and Nathaniel arrived at precisely the agreed time, wearing a coat that had no ornamentation, and needed none, and brought Eleanor's regards and a small book of Scottish airs he had found, he said, at a shop on Market Street, and thought might be useful. He handed it to Elizabeth without ceremony. She turned it in her hands. "Scottish airs," she said. "Your mother's," he said. "The kind she played you. There may be others in there worth knowing." She looked at him over the book. He was standing in her parlor in the early evening light, and there was nothing complicated in his expression, no management, no distance, no measured distance between himself and the room. He was simply there, in the uncomplicated way of someone who has decided where he means to be and stopped negotiating with himself about it. "Thank you," she said. She meant it for more than the book. "Don't thank me," he said. Play something. She did. After supper, while Constance found a reason to be in the other room, Elizabeth sat at the pianoforte and played two of the airs from the book, and Nathaniel sat across the room and listened, the way he listened to everything completely without pretense, as though the thing being offered deserved his full attention, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. When she finished, the room was quiet. "You played those for someone who isn't here," he said. It was what his mother had said the first morning in the sitting room on Ashcroft House. She wondered if Eleanor had told him or if he simply saw the same thing. "I did," she said, "and for someone who is." He held her gaze. "Your father will keep his house," he said. Not a promise he had never been a man for promises he couldn't substantiate. A statement of his belief, which was its own kind of promise from a man who chose his words with care. "I know," she said, "because we didn't let them take it without a fight." September came with cooler air and the particular gold light of early autumn in Pennsylvania. The hearing before the Court of Common Pleas lasted 2 days. Thomas Hale presented the acquisition structure, the Bracewell documentation, the parallel case from the Voss matter, and Cecilia Whitmore's deposition with the quiet, organized precision of a man who had been building toward this for 2 years. Whitmore's attorneys challenged and deflected and reframed with considerable skill, and there were moments in those 2 days when the outcome felt genuinely uncertain. Elizabeth sat in that courtroom both days. Constance beside her, Margaret behind her, and Nathaniel, who had no formal role in the proceedings, but who was present in the way he was always present, steadily, without announcement, as though it had simply not occurred to him to be elsewhere. The court found for the petition on the second afternoon. Harlan Whitmore's acquisition of the promissory note through Bracewell and Associates was ruled invalid on grounds of concealed interest. The note was voided. The Fairchild property in Lancaster was clear of encumbrance, and the court's written finding, which Hale had specifically requested be made part of the public record, documented the acquisition method in sufficient detail that the 6 other families on his list had grounds to pursue their own remedies. Elizabeth sat very still when the ruling was read. She heard it clearly. She understood every word. She did not cry because she was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her that the appropriate response to a correct outcome is gratitude, not relief. That relief implies you doubted the outcome was possible, and she had never allowed herself to doubt that, not fully, not where anyone could see it. Outside the courthouse in the early September air, she stood on the steps and let the day settle around her. Margaret was saying something warm and celebratory. Constance was already discussing next steps. People moved past them on the street in the way Philadelphia always moved, occupied, purposeful, indifferent to individual victories. Nathaniel stood beside her, not close enough to draw observation, close enough to matter. "Your father will get a letter today," he said. "Hale is sending one by express post," she said. "He'll have it by Friday." A pause. "And you," he said, "what do you need?" She thought about it honestly, because he had asked honestly, and that was what he deserved. "I need to go home and play the piano for a while," she said, "and then I need supper, and then I'd like—" She paused. "I'd like very much to not solve anything for the remainder of the evening." "That," Nathaniel said, "I can assist with." She looked at him. He was looking back in the direct, unhurried way that was entirely his, the way he had looked at her across a ballroom floor when she had walked toward him on a dare and told him the truth about it, and he had taken her hand and danced with her, and neither of them had known what the summer would ask of them. She knew now, and she was glad, not in spite of what it had cost, but including it, because the cost was what had shown her who she was and who he was and what the two of them together were capable of. Elizabeth Fairchild had come to Philadelphia on a dare. She had stayed to fight for her father's home for 8 families who had no one else to ask for a truth that Harlan Whitmore had spent years betting nobody would bother to prove. She had played Haydn for a room full of strangers and a Scottish air for a woman who listened like it mattered, and she had crossed a ballroom floor when every sensible person stepped back, and she had not once pretended to be less than she was, or more than she knew, or something she wasn't. And standing on those courthouse steps in the early autumn light with Nathaniel Ashcroft beside her, and her father's house safe in Lancaster, and the whole long, hard, honest summer behind her. Elizabeth understood something her mother had tried to tell her once, in the way mothers tell their daughters things they hope will outlast them. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision made clearly and deliberately that the truth was worth more than the safety of staying silent. She had made that decision on a ballroom floor in June. She had made it again every morning since. She intended to keep making it for the rest of her life, in every room she walked into, with her head level and her hands steady and the full knowledge of what she was worth. That was not the beginning of her story. It was the proof of it.